So with that, I'm really pleased to get to introduce the next panel, and who are all leading this conversation on how a focus on place changes engagement and inspires people on many levels. And the three of them have inspired me in many ways. Dan Latorre has led our efforts on civic engagement around technology and digital placemaking, looking at how the virtual realm supports the physical realm and how they can support each other. But also he's first to say that it's not about the tech, it's about the human connections, and it's about the place that can better drive tech. But he's the one that got us on social media and has made me an addict to Twitter, as some of you may know. But Robert St. Mary from Patronicity, his model at Patronicity is really turning philanthropy upside down and democratizing philanthropy. And we just came from a meeting this morning of funders that are all leading in various ways to move philanthropy to be place-led, to have it not just give better grants, but to build capacity of communities, build connections, and have communities really drive what they want their communities to look like. And his funding program supports that for crowdfunding. But what's really powerful about it is it emerged from a state program within Michigan. You heard a lot about Detroit yesterday. Michigan has been leading at a state level also on place-led governance and place-led development across many sectors. And this funding program emerged from and supports that effort. Gilbert Rochecouste is one of my good friends from Australia that has inspired me really as much as anyone in the placemaking movement. And he is really a pioneer of placemaking in Australia. He's brought me around on fun tours around Australia a couple times, but is also, it has many other people. As we saw this morning, there's an Asia-Pacific meeting of a few dozen people. It's amazing to have so many people at this conference from the Asia-Pacific area, and how they are leading this conversation. And I think, and I often say that region has made a lot of the same mistakes as the rest of the world, but is quicker to admit it. You just travel a lot more, and is therefore, I think, coming up with a lot of the best models for place governance and understanding placemaking. So there's a really, that network, and it's a network of networks, is something really exciting to build on, and Gilbert's been a sort of a foundation to it from early on. And lastly, to introduce Jennifer Keesmaat, who I first met when she did a much better introduction job introducing me at a conference before you were planning director in Toronto. But I've also got to work with, while you've been planning director, and one of she is, I think, one of the biggest forces in the world around these conversations, as you'll quickly see if you haven't already. But one of the things that's really remarkable about her is how she's a vessel for this conversation. How she is getting people excited about talking about place and city building in a way that I haven't seen before. She's hosting conversations on every scale, on social media, in person, in roundtables, and allowing many different perspectives to all add to each other in a way that I haven't seen before from the planning realm. So,
hello. Good morning. While we're just getting set up here, I also just want to say thank you to all the PPS staff who have put this together. This is give it up. This is not, this is a network of networks like Ethan mentioned. I came up in the startup world and the .com, the first bubble and the second bubble, where there was so much money, but actually not that many ideas that were new. And if anything, from what I've heard so far, the opposite is happening. This is a very lean and agile event, and the ideas and the energy and the sort of leadership that's happening and being expressed here is tremendous. So I'm very grateful to be here and to kick off the day. So first, we're just gonna go through a little bit more in depth from what Ethan was saying on what we do and what we're about. And then we're going to have a little dialogue, and we're going to be involving you in that as well. All right? So first up is Rob.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to PPS for having us. I've been just excited. I mean, as a Detroit native and working in my home city, it was great to see everything yesterday about Detroit, especially Campus Marshes. And like Ethan, also social media to a certain extent. So if you follow me on Twitter, that photo is actually of me at campus marches. So it is a very important thing that has been going on with that. And I just have to say that Detroit really, and this is not, boosterism in any particular way, although we do like you to visit, I really see Detroit as an innovative town. It has been for well over 100 years. If you want proof of it, just look outside on the street. That thing impacts us in ways that everything from climate change to being able to get around, and the music and the arts, and of course everything else that you enjoy. So as for myself, I'm Rob St. Mary. I'm Director of Outreach for Patronicity. And as for my background, 14 years in media, 7 in commercial radio, 7 in public radio. When I was in public radio, I had 2 big jobs. One was I was working on neighborhoods and community in Detroit. So I went into the neighborhoods, worked with the block clubs, tried to build sourcing and bring their stories forward much more directly than as you were as a journalist, sort of as the medium. And then also I was the guy trying to make public radio fundraisers sound listenable. So if you're Americans, and you listen to public radio, give me $60 and a tote bag. But I think that all of that really does come together when we talk about crowdfunding. And crowdfunding, of course, in the last several years has kind of exploded. It's become a way, as our founder Chris Blauvelt said, when he looked at it after he used it himself for a film in 2010, that he looked at the model and said, well, it just seems to be middle and upper middle class whites moving money around each other for art projects, which he said, that's fine, but here in Detroit, where he had moved in 2009, he was looking around at the needs, and he was also looking at the attention, as you saw, Time Magazine, the various documentaries that were coming out about Detroit, and saying, could we take this goodwill for the expats who had moved along or for those who were coming in to really have a stake in the neighborhoods? Because as we know, Detroit just went through the biggest municipal bankruptcy in US history, and this was before that, but how can we activate the neighbors? How can we use all of these various elements of community engagement and funding in order to make things more attractive and make things better for the people that are living in those neighborhoods, the people who are holding on in those neighborhoods and improving it and really doing the work? And this is what we came up with, crowd granting. Now, this came through a story where we have, with Patronicity, we do matched and non-matched projects. And we had a guy who came to us with a food truck idea. And he said, I have this food truck I want to do. I'm going to need about 30,000. And we found out that the MEDC, which is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, had a grant proposal out for food trucks. So Chris calls up Lansing and talks to them and says, hey, I've got this guy who wants to crowdfund a food truck. If he raises half, will you give the other half? They said, well, our RFP's out, our grants are already out, the model's already set, we really can't do anything now, but it's interesting. So about 6 months later, they called back and said, you know that idea you had? Would you want to do that towards placemaking? So that's how we developed our first program. And with the state of Michigan over the past 2 years, moving now into our 3rd year on October 1st, we have done over $5.3 million in terms of funding and match, 2.7 in funding, 2.3 in match at this point today, over 80 projects, 98% success rate on funding. And what we have done with the MEDC is they have laid out their guidelines and then said, this is the pool of money. And the projects, we go to the neighborhoods, they come to us, we look at what they have, we vet them, we pass them on to the MEDC. MEDC says, sounds great. Then we switch our hat from being a vetting organization and consultancy for them to being a fundraising consultancy. And this is what I was talking about with public radio. So this is where sort of my skill set comes in to teach the people on the ground how to run a fundraising campaign and how to use both the traditional model of what you do in the neighborhood and engaging in the neighborhood, plus the digital aspects. And what we've seen is that in a lot of ways, these projects in the state of Michigan, rural and small town alike, and in the city of Detroit, possibly never would have happened because for a lot of them, this democratization issue is a question of who writes the grants, who knows the granting organization, how do you work the grant system? And what we found is a lot of people had no access to that. They didn't know how to do that. So this was a way for them to come in, start a page, show us what they have, we talk to them, we gather it, we move it on, and it democratizes grants in that way. Because of the success that we've had, the state of Massachusetts and now the state of Indiana have also come on board for programs that are currently launched. And what I've seen in terms of the value is that it gets the neighbors motivated to work amongst themselves, because these are often projects that have been laying dormant. Maybe there's an old park that it's kind of run down and seen better days, or it's something new that they've been talking about for years and they were waiting for that last piece in order to make it happen. And in the case recently of one project that I wanted to talk about, it can cross cultures as well. In Hamtramck, there's a thing called Hamtramck Disneyland. Now, the city of Hamtramck is actually a city that the city of Detroit kind of grew around. Originally, it was a Polish enclave, and as the Polish community moved out, there's a lot of Bangladeshi and Yemeni immigrants. They say it's the world in 2 square miles, and it truly is. There really is a broad range of immigrants and broad range of languages you hear on the street. And at times, there had been sort of conflicts between these various groups in terms of what the future of Hamtramck was going to be. But a recent editorial in the Hamtramck Review noted that this program that we did for Hamtramck Disneyland crossed those borders. It brought the folks from the Yemeni community together and the Bangladeshi community together, and folks like me, who I live in Hamtramck as well. So it really built that kind of capacity. And for the sponsor, they see it as being able to let it go, just to say, here it is, and allow the community to have their hand. If they want the project happens. And that's the great thing that I see about the democratization that we see in Patronicity. For the sponsors, they see less admin time, and also they're seeing about 4 to 5 times the amount of press attention compared to before under the grant proposals and when the grants were handed out, in terms of them doing a big check presentation or doing a ribbon cutting. I used to run a newsroom, so when I would get those, there's a lot of things vying for our attention. But when you see the neighbors working among themselves, that's something in the media you cannot ignore. And that's really what Patronicity helps those neighborhoods to do. So like I said, from a democratization process of grants, we've seen it. And it's great to talk to these folks and how they've been able to bring hundreds of people together behind these projects at small dollar. You know, a few dollars here, a few dollars there, but it really adds up, and it can make a big influence and a big difference within those communities. So, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. And Gilbert, it's Friday, folks, so I think Gilbert has a little something to say about the fact that it's the end of this week.
That's right. What are the chances of 3 guys wearing hats in the room are all in the same panel? How freaking amazing is that? My God. That's like a... How do you feel? I've got a beret in my hat. Let's get it right into it. Fantastic to be here. How about we start by standing up? I'm going to share a little bit of placemaking energy with you. So a little ritual that I use in Australia for thousands of placemakers. So I'm going to get you to stand up. I'm from a little island called Mauritius, voted the world's happiest country a few years in a row over the last 10 years. And I want you to, this is a little bit of a Sega dance. I want you to bend your knees and just like you're in a washing machine. Beautiful. That's it. And bend, especially the guys. This is really good for the guys. Yeah, beautiful. This is about embodied placemaking. And then what I want you to do, oh, you're really good. I'm taking up all my talk and just dancing. Maybe that's the go. And then what I want you to do is repeat after me. I'll do it once, and you go do it really loud. And it's all about the energy coming through the room and going out to your great places and making great places. I'm going to do it once and repeat it 3 times. Ready? Chugga, 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 choo, choo. Chugga, 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 choo, choo, choo. Ready? 3 times. Let's go. Chugga, 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 choo, choo. Chugga, 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 choo, choo, choo. Chugga, chugga, chugga. One more time. 2. Chugga, 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 choo, choo. Beautiful. All right. Okay. All right. What was that about? My goodness. Well, I suppose I've got a few minutes to talk about my real talk. But really, you know, I'm passionate about people and place, obviously, and embodied placemaking. And I think part of the whole thing about placemaking is energy, yeah? And then how we hold space, how we facilitate space, and how we transform space. The transformative agenda is very one about an embodied agenda. So that's what Melbourne was about. The Melbourne story, which I've been involved with 25 years and about a couple of 100 projects. And we were named the world's most unlivable city back in 1983, or one of the top 5 most unlivable. And now, in the last 4 years, we've been called the most livable city 4 years in a row. And we're always competing with Vancouver and Toronto. But really, we've got issues too of gentrification and increasing homelessness and a shrinking middle class. It's the same global issues, yeah? And so really what I wanted to share with you is the Melbourne story, the DNA, because what it was is a real collegial effort where a whole heap of different sectors, architecture, landscape design, social justice, equity, Indigenous groups, lots of traders and enlightened developers got together very early on and started to share a real concept of what do we want to be. You know, we wanted to reclaim our skin and our city. We wanted to be proud. We don't have great, you know, sea views. We've just got a dirty brown river, but it's a beautiful dirty brown river. And in the Yarra, and we've reinvigorated that, and we got a beautiful Indigenous story there. And I think what we have found with the Melbourne story, it's based on a real ecosystem of place. And these principles of the wisdom lies in the community. It takes many hands to create a place. The importance of enlightened capital, the importance of having a team that's been there for 30 years, Rob Adams and his team, and working with Young Gal for 30 years non-stop every day, yeah? Consistently creating and activating space and animating the streets and beautifying the streets and really unleashing the power of free. So really those principles have been really powerful for us, and now we're starting to move into that whole concept of placemaking as a new environmentalism. You know, as a city of commons, what does that mean for us? You know, we have a very enlightened citizenship now. We've trained up thousands of people to become placemakers, just citizens, yeah? And one of the best placemakers are traders, which is really interesting. When you get to that life cycle, you become the world's most livable city, you start to embed yourself and go, what's next? So I think we don't do a lot of tactical urbanism as such. The people become the placemakers, yeah? I think that's where we all need to go. A real participatory democracy that really embeds our sense of who we are and that we can participate in place. But it takes an enlightened government and council on the ground. Really what this talk should be about, democratizing the ground plane, yeah? And how we build a real sense of that inclusiveness and social justice around place. But also, how do we unleash people's creativity? We have thousands of artists, and you can see in that photo, and they're very active, you know? They'll tell you how to suck eggs. So but they control the space. So basically those 300 amazing buskers, and there's about 3,000 of them, they control the streets. So we have a guideline, but the elder buskers activate the place. The traders bring in the other buskers and the jazz bands, and they, you know, there's about 50 social enterprise cafes in Melbourne now, yeah, looking after the homeless. So this is another embedded ecosystem, yeah? We become a little bit more enlightened of our communities and all the hard edges of what places are. So in that respect, I think working with our Indigenous people is really important for us. We have the oldest continuous wisdom on the planet, over 60,000 years. I'm really proud to be Australian, and we're still learning, and you know what that is, and we need to heal that wound. And part of that healing is working with our Indigenous communities in creating concepts like the Koori Night Market, which is an Indigenous name for the Victorian Indigenous communities. And this is a night market that they run, they operate, bush foods, yeah, the importance of Indigenous art, dance, but they run it, they make the money, they embed it, they activate these spaces. So all these important elements of how do we work with those hard to, you know, work with, you know, these hard groups, the homeless, the Indigenous, the young people, are really important to us. And obviously how we embed the laneway culture. And how about that laneway yesterday? Who went to that laneway, the opening? Hands up. Big hand for that. Oh my goodness. Well, can I say, that's what we did 25 years ago, and we got too many laneways. It's like we're over laneways now because, you know, it's become our, its biggest tourist destination is our laneways, our stencil art and our creativity and the surprise and wonder. And now we were looking, what's next? But we love our city. We want to protect our city. You know, it's one of those key things of what happens when you're too successful. So, but we've got our issues and we've got our challenges. But we do, there's the collegial element is really important. Obviously we have a great health system, yeah, that gives us a net. We're not freaking out about our health and who's going to look after us. So those conditions are really important to society, yeah? I just want to name that, folks. So bring that on in every society, and free education and all those elements that really hold, you know, the embodied place around social justice, which I think is going to be the biggest issue on the planet. It's not so much a question of sustainability in the future. It's about social sustainability and resilience. So our little communities are really unfolding themselves and really doing their own community. Hundreds of communities have been doing this in Victoria. Community blitzes where, you know, the men shared, you know, older men who'd got nothing to do, hang out and make boxes. I'm sure you've got them here. But anyway, what they do is activate space, allow the, you know, Country Women's Association, young people, they're blitzing their communities, painting, public art, and bring it on. The important thing is for we as facilitators of space, that's probably the most important thing I've learned, how to hold space and facilitate and get out of the way. But really have the understanding of the spiritual commerce, yeah? The meaning making of commerce and place coming together. I used to be the general manager of the biggest mall in the Southern Hemisphere, so that's why I'm doing this karma, to clean all that out. But anyway, that's another story. And the importance of, I think, transformative engagement, my last point, is something that we're very passionate about participatory democracy, deliberative engagement, and how do we really give and hand over the power to our community members and citizens. And the key thing that we do a lot is train our community members to become placemakers and citizens. So really that's an important part of our process, where those hard issues really that smash together, when we have the community members become the advocates of place, really, you know, you can get out of the way. And that's where the celebration begins, yeah? Because that's what we're here to do as humans, to connect, to play, to touch. Not always touch, but I've got 136 first cousins from Mauritius, so we touch a lot.
Okay.
So anyway, I better get out of there. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Gilbert. So speaking of which, let me see, where is the thingy? Is this the thingy? Oh, sorry. Hello. Great. So one of the things that I'm really excited to talk about here is a new project that we're launching. And before I get into that, I actually kind of want to, well, it's about digital placemaking. So those of you that attended the work session on Wednesday got sort of the in-depth about what a lot of the ideas are about this, about how to organize a community of practice around the sort of hybrid online-offline modes that are facing us, that are opportunities, that are challenges. But even though I'm a digital guy, since I've been, you know, since I met Ethan and since I got involved in urbanism and transportation and bicycle advocacy and all of that, which kind of came out of my crisis during 9/11, which was, you know, I had a kind of coming, crisis moment where I was like, am I making the world a better place? And that question is a longer story, but the short answer is that it led me to exactly these points about placemaking and the sort of the triangulation and the exponential effects that can be generated by being more mindful about how we design and use our urban environment, the places that we live in. So, but I'm not just a digital person. I never have been. I've always been very social. So one of the things to me that's very important is like to actually do and to be attention and be mindful of our bodies. So right now, in a lot of these events, what we've been doing is you guys have all been facing forward. And so all I have to do is move over here into the center. And I want you all to kind of just, I'm going to look at me here, kind of turn around, adjust, pivot, right? Okay, let's see. This is about right, I think. Maybe right here. Yeah. So now what to me is really important is not that you're looking at me, but now you can all see each other, right? Look at each other. Look who's in the room, all right? And now the other thing that's important about what we're doing here is this is placemaking is an approach, it's a process, it's a craft, it's a practice. It's not about the design, right? It's not about the objects. Those matter, just like with technology, those are really important and they're profound and they can affect a lot of things, but that's not what this is about. This is about being able to connect with each other like Gilbert was just saying. So one of the things I want to do is just right now, so for those of you that are master placemakers, you've been around for a long time, you're sort of elders in the community, can you please stand up? Are you standing up? Okay, Fred, all right. Yep, Setha, all right. Yeah, who else? Come on. Don't be modest. I'm sure there's a few more elders here. Keep standing up, keep standing up. She is not able to stand up, but must be recognized. Okay. All right, so these folks have been leading, the practice, innovating, since the inception of this in one form or another. And if there are any other of you who are maybe a little bashful and you still can stand up, you can still do that. But notice who's in the room, and of course we know many of them. And well, this is what I'm going to get to. So, so let's give them a round of applause for all the decades of work that they've been doing. All right, thank you. Now, who of you are practitioners? You've been at this for a while, and maybe you're not like the elder sort of class in terms of experience, not just age, but you are solidly identifying as practitioners. You kind of know this backwards and forwards, and you are practicing this out in the field. Please stand up. Yeah, okay. All right, no, keep standing up, everyone, yeah. So of course, it's age diverse, it's gender diverse, culturally diverse, and I'm sure more maybe geographically diverse, right? So these are the folks that are pulling a lot of the weight, opening doors, making things happen. So let's give everyone another round of applause, because they need all the support that they can get, because it's often uphill, right? So now, guess who's next? So all of you newbies, so who's here that's new? I have a really important thing to say about you, so I really want to see you. So please stand up. If you recently graduated or you had a life-changing moment like I did and you switched directions in your life and you're now getting involved in placemaking, young or old, but you're sort of new to this. You've only been at it for a few years. Please stand up. Okay. Great. So this panel, part of what we're talking about here is yesterday was the future of places. You guys, wait, no, keep standing up. Well, hey, chill. These young people, these young newbies, they gotta get more energy here, all right. You guys are, in one form or another, the future of placemaking. Because again, it's not about the object, it's not about the substance, it's about people, right? So this is the next generation, the new energy, the new diversity that's coming into placemaking, and all three groups are as important because this is about creating a life cycle that is going to grow and get even larger. So let's just take a moment again to think about that and give another round of applause for everyone. Okay. So back to the why I just wanted to do that because even though I talk about technology and that's like the hat that I wear, I want to just give you a tip to this amazing professor at the University of Bristol, at West London in Bristol. And we all here, or you are confronted in different city departments about smart cities and all of this technology hype. But in his closing chapter entitled From Smart Cities to Wise Cities, he opens up basically saying that the evidence that smartness is building more inclusive cities is fragile. That relates to democracy, right? So a lot of the technology that's happening, a lot of the directions or the assumptions that are happening may not actually be helping democracy. Won't go through this, but I've come up with a rubric of is your project digital placemaking or not? And the basic point is kind of how do we translate placemaking into technology terms? So is it contextual to place? Are local people collaborating and making and using that technology or those tools, whether they be physical things or softwares? Does it support a human scale relationship? Does it increase face-to-face interaction? So there's a lot of hype around, like, say, Minecraft and other simulation type interfaces, but if it's getting us to spend more time in front of the laptops and not turning to each other and talking, I don't think it's that digital placemaking-y. It's kind of lower on the scale. Now, maybe it has other benefits, and you should consider those, but these are not, I didn't want to propose, and I don't think we should have hard and fast rules because we don't really have a lot of those in placemaking, right? There's a lot of relativity and contextual subtlety that we need to be aware of. So, to conclude, this is why we're launching the Digital Placemaking Institute with another zealous nut, Glenn Harding, down in Australia, who's been leading all of the work around urban screens and the non-commercial civic use of physical digital interfaces to spur people coming together in a whole host of different ways that I think can be unlocked. So if you want to find out more information about the Digital Placemaking Institute as we launch it next year, please email me, now that we all know each other, and I'll add you onto our list to stay connected to all of that. So thank you for that. And to wrap us up and bring us home on these, some of these points, let's hear from Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today, and I only have one complaint, and the complaint is that we didn't have all the videos turned off before we did that cha-cha-cha thing, because I'm really nervous about where that's going to show up in my world someday. It could be pretty unpleasant, I'm suspecting. I want to begin by just asking a really simple question, and it's this. What are cities but places for people? Imagine if this was a question that in fact drove all of our city building. This notion that at the end of the day, we come together as a society in public space, as people gathering to create livable, prosperous, sustainable societies. Now, this may seem like a simple question, but the reality is that our city building has become institutionalized in our lifetime. The great Jane Jacobs was, of course, the voice of this movement in this room, who brought that idea to its knees. And Jane, in fact, rallied against the institutionalization of the places where we live. She rallied against the modernization, the taking away of the diversity and the nuance that, in fact, celebrates the deepest, profound aspects of our shared humanity. But we're at an interesting moment in history. We're at an interesting moment in history because we are seeing the opening up, the sharing, the recognition that not only can our cities be places where we must live, but they can in fact be places where everyone can thrive. Now, this raises a really interesting question, and it's really a question about the role of government. Because government is, at the end of the day, the way we govern ourselves, the way we structure ourselves. Our democracies are, in fact, where we make the most profound decisions about everyday life. And governments collect money, they have power, they make big decisions. And I want to ask you, do our governments reflect the values of the placemaking movement? Do our governments, in fact, play a transformative role, our municipal governments, in making our cities places where everyone will thrive? And this is a critical question, because there's a risk that we simply tamper at the edges, at the margins, instead of leading transformative change. Now, I'm the chief planner of the City of Toronto, which is a city of 2.8 million people, but it is a city of neighborhoods. It is a city filled with distinct and unique places. I live in a neighborhood right in the heart of that city, in one of the densest part of that city, and I have the great honor and privilege of knowing my neighbors. And in part, that's because we're a walkable, transit-oriented neighborhood. We have a lot of amenities within walking distance of home. So our lives play out on our neighborhood streets. This is a gift. But we're growing very quickly. We're transforming. We had, in 2015, more housing starts than any other city in North America, aside from New York City. When I became the chief planner in 2013, I looked at the magnitude of the job before me and asked a really critical question. How can we harness this growth to create livable, sustainable places where people experience community vibrancy as something that is uplifting, that is transformative, that allows us to embrace and celebrate our humanity in every way? And so I took a little tour of the city, and I went to the places that work best. And I asked myself a critical question. How did these places come to be? And in every instance, those places were places that were an outcome of deep collaborations between grassroots organizations, civic activists, and municipal governments, and NGOs as well. I'm thinking about places like Witchwood Barns, if you know Toronto, or the Brickworks, or even the Distillery District, or many of our most beautiful neighborhoods that have been protected despite the tremendous amount of growth that we've seen. And what became clear to me that the only way that I could actually embrace this role as a chief planner in this dynamic, changing city, facing so many profound pressures, was to work collaboratively, to open up the role, to think about government in a fundamentally different way. So I created a blog. The blog is called Own Your City. It's about empowerment. It's about recognizing that every good thing we do in the city is something that we create together, and that government plays a role in facilitating those collaborations. Now, of course, I was promptly told that as a chief planner, I'm not allowed to blog, but that's a whole other story. I also, at the time, had a Twitter account, and I was told, well, it's not appropriate for a municipal official to be tweeting. And so I said I didn't want the job. If I can't tweet, I don't want the job. If I can't have a transparent, open mechanism and platform to talk about the aspirations and to hear back responses from residents in the city about their aspirations, I didn't want the job. Woo. And of course, I've still got it, miraculously. But that has led to an opportunity to brace a whole series of platforms, some of which Ethan mentioned in his introduction. The Chief Planner Roundtable is about bringing voices into City Hall. We broadcast these, we live stream these, and the Chief Planner Roundtables are about bringing the voices that don't typically sit in committee rooms and have a voice into City Hall. And we do something that governments don't usually do in public, and it's this. We ask the questions we don't know the answers to. We bring experts into the room and say, you know what? We have a mobility problem in our suburbs. We have a sustainability problem. We have an affordable housing problem. When we ask the questions we don't know the answer to in order to collectively generate new knowledge about how we can address some of the greatest challenges that we in fact face. I also introduced something called PIPS, which stands for Planners in Public Space. Touring the offices, there's 5 offices across the city where city planners work. I saw a lot of planners sitting in windowless cubicles. And it became clear to me that this was not in any way aligned with the aspirations of most planners who engage in city building. So getting planners out into public space, we go to the places where people already gather, and we have conversations with people on the street as they're walking by. We do it in malls, we do it at subway stations, we do it in public squares, and it is about opening up government processes and drawing people who would never typically come to a public meeting or sit through a workshop into our city building processes. And it has been transformative. As a result of PIPS, planners are meeting and collaborating with residents in their communities in a whole new way. And residents who've never planned in any way, never even realized there was something such as a planning department, are participating in our conversations. We've also generated a youth engagement strategy. Thousands and thousands of people every year come out to our public meetings, but there's a little problem. City of Toronto is a very diverse city. More than 50% of our city is non-white. More than 50% of our city are renters. And the fastest growing cohort in our city are people between the ages of 18 and 35, millennials. But our public meetings are dominated by white homeowners over the age of 50. So you can imagine that the output that we get in the context of those public meetings is not even remotely reflective of the diversity of the communities that we need to work collaboratively with in order to create a great city. So we hired a team of youth researchers who went out and engaged youth in their own spaces on their own terms, and they came back to us with a whole series of recommendations which we are aggressively implementing, and they don't look anything like the things that governments typically do. We launched a podcast. I encourage you to listen to it, invisiblecity.ca, invisiblecitypodcast.ca. This podcast, it doesn't sound like policy. It's a lot of narrative and storytelling, and it's called Invisible City because the objective is to peel back the layers around how cities are created and constructed in such a way that people can actually participate in the decision-making in a meaningful way. If we're serious about democratizing our cities and our placemaking, we will collaborate in profound new ways with the governments that, in fact, are shaping all of our futures. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was amazing. So I think we've stirred up a lot of questions here. So instead of just watching us talk, which you just did, but instead of watching us have a dialogue with each other, I want to just go out. Yeah, so if we can have questions from the audience. So you need some extra mics. Yeah. So who has a burning question from anything that just happened in the past 20 minutes? Over there with the shawl or the pashmina? Yeah, stand up. Thank you. Okay. Well, wait for the microphone. This is for our live streaming guests. And for those that are watching the live stream, if anyone has a question, just tweet out a question with the hashtag Placemaking Week, and I'll catch it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your expertise and your fantastic presentations. I've already hit a few of you up with this question, and I guess I would love to hear from any of you around how to deal with angry middle class and upper middle class people. And you know, because I've drunk the Kool-Aid, I get it, it's about inclusivity, but for some people inclusivity feels exclusionary because they're just so uncomfortable with poor people or people who look or smell different than them. So.
Okay, yeah. I think, Jennifer, why don't you start off with that?
Sure, I can begin. This is one of the reasons why broadening the participation in city building is so critical. I've never been in a community planning setting where people have been unwilling to listen to the people around them. And so finding a way to ensure there's a diversity of voices and that every voice gets an opportunity to share its perspective, I believe is the roots, is really the underpinning of beginning to change hearts and minds. And we identify and call out the importance of shifting from how we once did things to doing things differently moving forward. And sometimes we get trapped in doing things the way we've always done. And we've actually written right into our official plan that a key objective of our city building and our consultation processes is to change minds, to actually empower people to think differently about the city and their experience of the city. And one of the ways that happens is by hearing from a diversity of perspectives as to how the city is lived and experienced. I facilitated a forum several years ago and had a really beautiful experience where there was a table with every color of the rainbow in terms of the ethnicities around the table. And everyone, you know, we were going around the table and everyone was talking and giving their perspective. And there was an older white gentleman at the table who was born and raised in the city, and he was listening to the perspectives, and it came his turn to speak. And he looked around the table and he said, you know, I came here thinking I was going to tell you what to do, and I've realized I should probably sit back and listen. And that to me is the transformative power of bringing people together.
Gilbert?
Just to add on to that, I think, you know, it's the head, heart, and hands, and how we hold the process. And I think that transformative process where other voices are heard is absolutely critical through co-design or kitchen table conversations, or getting out of their comfort zones, going into a cafe or a cultural cafe and breaking food and breaking bread. Even music, I think even when there's a hot issue, we can get to know our humanity first, and then we do the work.
So part of, I think, one of the themes that I've heard loud and clear over the past few days is sort of a yin and yang contrasting thing, which is we're all talking about how do we get more subtle awareness to be increased, emotionally, physically, socially, culturally. So deeper appreciation for subtle qualities that make up a place, the light, the time of day, all of these things that profoundly affect us that we even ourselves as placemakers need to challenge ourselves to even deepen further. At the same time, we are in the Anthropocene era of irreparable harm to the planet and are killing ourselves. There's a democracy crisis in the US, it's arguable to say that we live in a plutocracy. We don't even have a democracy, and other places have diminishing democracy. We have situations of profound civil rights issues and environmental combinations of that with what's happening in the Dakota Access Pipeline, indigenous movements, all of these things that are happening that are profound at high levels of magnitude that are overwhelming in the sort of immensity of them. So I think that's good. I think so part of it is like we need to ultimately be more vulnerable. And there's a lot of different tactics, and a lot of what placemaking is great at is creating a safe space to allow frictions to not be something that generates fear, but generates curiosity. Other burning questions? Let's get 3 of them, because we have just like 5 minutes left, and then we can maybe synthesize with the panel here. Where's number 2?
Great, thank you. Neil Rochecouste from San Francisco. I'd like to pick up on something that Gilbert said in his talk about the need for enlightened city leadership to be able to step back and allow things to happen. And then to Jennifer, if you can imagine the deinstitutionalization of planning, are there things that a city could let go of first and to give over to civil society, to the NGOs, to the nonprofits, to the community, that the city would feel comfortable and safe doing it, so that we can actually bring some more major decisions a little bit closer to the people who are most impacted by them?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is yes, absolutely. There's some things that you can't give over because they require an expertise. Interpreting the federal standards related to building heritage buildings, I have very specialized staff who work on that file. But there's a whole series of heritage experts in the community who participate in that dialogue around evaluating those resources and protecting those resources. So there's a line of things that I think are pretty easy to hand over, and then there's a line of things where we have an accountability as a public servant, and we have to hold the reins pretty tightly because the buck stops with us and we have an accountability. I'll give you an example of what I'll call a really great example. One of our challenges in the City of Toronto is that there's just too much happening, and we have a hard time getting to everything. And there's a wonderful new organization that was started up by a bunch of young people in the city called the Next City Prize. And this is a competition, a design competition that fit with our youth engagement strategy about bringing youth in the planning process, about reimagining small-scale public spaces in the city. So we, in fact, collaborate with this organization, but they run it, they do it. We put very little effort, and really it's their program, but it is directly aligned with our youth engagement strategy. They've taken that one step farther and created a whole movement around laneways. Laneways is something which is critical for us to be looking at, but it's not in our work program, and we don't have the staff resources to be addressing it. And they have been generating a dialogue and a discourse around placemaking in laneways. That's something that we can let go of. That's something that, in fact, they can do a lot of the community groundwork with us that can then inform the policy recommendations that we're making for City Council. So I think there's areas where it's essential, it's critical for us to be loosening up the reins and having the community, quite frankly, take over. The laneways is a great example. And there's other places where we must keep our hand fully on the rudder because that's our obligation.
Can I just say the best example globally I've seen recently is Bologna in Italy, where I think the city is commons, which is radical for the government to really step back and allow the citizen-based budgets and citizen-led renewal happen, which I think is a little moment in globally where we're about to head. So watch that space. The city is commons, yeah.
Similar thing in Barcelona. There's a huge sort of like open source, participatory, platform cooperative-oriented movement happening there, which is probably also no mistake when I talk to the sort of digital democracy activists there, because I wonder how much that's been affected by it being a city of public markets, and how is that, the ripple effect of having that type of more subtle social environment through placemaking. So about that same question, we're going to go, there's one more question that we're going to get there in the back, but Rob, the same question that was just asked. So part of the other pattern that I'm hearing is there's like new modes of governance or redefining governance. There's formal, informal. We're moving from top down to what I would say bottom up to more like porous, where there's this kind of more relationship, and that's very much what you guys are encountering. So what would you say to that?
That's what we found working with the MEDC and putting together our first program in Michigan. I mean, obviously, the city of Detroit going through the bankruptcy, But what it allowed it to do was at the neighborhood level that if people could, if not financially support with a few dollars, at least promote the idea of maybe this park cleaning, you know, fix up the park, that those people become invested in their own neighborhoods in a much richer way than looking for the government to come and mow the lawn and do all the things, because it's just not there. So in the city of Detroit in many areas, so the neighbors take it upon themselves in order to beautify and create and do these projects and make the next thing. So what we find is that if you can engage them on a strategy of a fundraiser for the park in cooperation with a matching grant sponsor, they are then able to activate to do other things, because it's basically a tool for engagement, much more than it is a tool just for fundraising. It's a tool for storytelling also, is the way I see it, because they're able then to tell their story on the block by block level and say, these are our needs, this is what we now understand, and let me explain it to you. Especially as we were talking about, you know, to a broader range of folks who maybe live out in the suburbs and don't understand exactly what the day-to-day is in that neighborhood.
Great. Okay, last question in the back there, the gentleman with the black shirt.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I just wanted to build on that comment you made a moment ago, Daniel, about that sort of contrast, those contradictions. Lynn and I had dinner last night in this wonderful little middle-class restaurant on Robson Street, and that's a nice place along Robson Street, and we had it with a friend who lives in Vancouver, who then took us to Olympic Village, and we walked around there, and we saw the beaver, and that's a great little place around Olympic Village, and then she drove us back around the Lower East Side, and that was interesting. I'd never seen so many people on the streets, and that was a sort of a place. Now, but placemaking is not the answer to the Lower East Side, is it? You know, the question isn't how do we turn the place of the Lower East Side, how do we make it into that market I've heard about, and one thing and another. The question is, how do we tolerate the fact that the Lower East Side exists in a city like Vancouver? So how does placemaking tackle these structural issues? Because we've only got Lower East Sides because there's people like me eating in fancy restaurants on Robson Street and living in nice places like Olympic Village. So what's placemaking's contribution to those structural issues?
Great. That question embodies both this subtle issue and these big power systems that we're talking about. Jennifer.
So I'd love to begin just taking a stab of that. I'm sure my colleagues will want to weigh in as well. But you've made a poignant and important point, and it was actually something I was going to talk about in my opening remarks, but didn't for lack of time. And it's precisely for that reason that engagement with government is so powerful, because there's structural things that we create in our cities that go way beyond the local. They actually have to do with a whole variety of policy mechanisms that are structural, both at the city level, at the provincial level, and at the national level. And to think that turning on some music and doing the jig in a plaza is going to change those problems is actually fundamentally naive. On the other hand, there's things that we can do, and I'll use the example in Ontario, which is the Greenbelt. Our Greenbelt is provincial policy that shifted the land economics of the region and limited sprawl, thereby allowing the intensification of our neighborhoods, the intensification of our corridors and our existing built-up areas, which in turn now provides the density to actually allow for walkable main streets. Well, you don't get the walkable main street and the critical mass in the community without the provincial policy that in fact has limited the sprawl at the regional level. So this notion that this is why I think it's critical to engage in government processes that fundamentally shape the context in which we thrive. I had the opportunity as a chief planner to do the first ever mass rezoning in the city and to rezone 500 sites at once in our poorest neighborhoods that are currently only housing in our tower neighborhoods. And now you are allowed to have studios and workshops and artists housing and artists facilities in these buildings where previously you couldn't. Well, imagine driving that from the grassroots, and there was a grassroots movement engaged in a really significant way, but only through collaboration with these powerful mechanisms have we been able to enable the transformation that can happen at the very local level. So I would argue that place-based or place-led revitalization is entirely connected to the systems and processes that are happening at every single level of government. And the Downtown East Side is about a much broader societal challenge that is not going to be undone at the very local level, despite the fact that there is some of the most engaged and profound leadership at the local level within the Downtown East Side that has been working for decades to try and unlock that problem. There's structural changes that need to happen in order to begin to make a significant difference.
Yeah, so again, that's this question of like the momentum building, community organizing, sort of political power dimension of what happens when we get together and we connect with each other. Does that directly do something? Yes, but it also can lead to other things. I would add that just, you know, we don't want to be our own silo. There are all these other movements, housing rights, civil rights, human rights, all these other different movements that we should be seeing ourselves as a peer within a network of networks to connect to avoid the sort of looking to placemaking as a sort of central solution to many things. That I think would help a lot. If we want to create more radical questions like to what degree should housing be a commodity, right? If we're going to be able to have the energy to make big questions, to rethink how we're living on this planet, how we're living together, still placemaking creates a lot of that safe space and the energy and the solidarity to be able to ask bigger questions, which I think we've heard. So with that, I'm going to toss it to Mary. Thank you so much for waking up with us today at the beginning of the last day of the conference.